The woods stretched endlessly before me, a patchwork of towering pines and oaks draped in the golden hues of autumn. Crisp air bit at my face as I trudged deeper into the wilderness, rifle slung over my shoulder. This was my sanctuary, where the chaos of the world couldn't reach me. No emails, no phone calls, just the silence of nature and the thrill of the hunt. I'd been tracking a buck all morning, its prints fresh in the soft earth. A chill ran through me, not from the cold but from the anticipation. My boots crunched against the underbrush as I moved carefully, every step deliberate. A faint rustle ahead made me freeze. I crouched low, raising the rifle, and waited. But the sound wasn't from the deer. It was something else, a distant hum, barely audible at first. I frowned and crept toward the noise, following the faint buzz of an engine. As I pushed through a dense thicket, the forest opened up to reveal a clearing, and there it was, a cabin, secluded and weather-worn, hidden away as if it were a secret the woods didn't want to share. The place wasn't on any maps I'd seen, and curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer, boots silent on the mossy ground. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and I caught the faint smell of burning wood mixed with something else, cigar smoke. Peering through the window, I froze. Inside, a man leaned back in an old chair, a lit cigar between his fingers. He wasn't alone. Emily, my wife, sat across from him, her laugh cutting through the stillness like a blade. She looked different. Her hair was styled in a way I hadn't seen in years, and she wore a dress I didn't recognize, one that clung to her figure in all the ways that made my blood boil, not with desire, but with fury. The man slid a hand across the table, touching hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in closer, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. My fists clenched at my sides. Who the hell was this guy? I ducked lower, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. A glint caught my eye, a small, shiny object on the table between them. A coin. The man idly spun it on the wooden surface, its movement hypnotic. A faint scar on his left hand caught the light, adding to his rough demeanor. I wanted to burst through the door, demand answers, and make the bastard regret ever breathing the same air as Emily. But something held me back, a voice of reason, or maybe it was the shock of seeing my wife with another man, right here, in the middle of nowhere. Either way, I retreated, slipping back into the woods without making a sound. By the time I reached my truck, my mind was racing. Every moment of the past year suddenly felt like a lie. The late nights at work, the unexplained phone calls, the sudden coldness between us. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, staring out at the empty road ahead. I wasn't going to let this go. Not without answers. Not without making sure Emily and whoever the hell that was paid for what they'd done. The woods were quiet as I drove off, but their secrets were anything but. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I thought it might crack. The image of Emily laughing with that bastard seared into my brain. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the anger had simmered into something colder, sharper, a resolve. She wasn't going to talk her way out of this. Not this time. The house was dark, except for the faint glow of the living room lamp. I stepped inside, my boots echoing against the hardwood floor. Emily was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. She looked up, flashing that same smile she always used when she thought everything was fine. "Hey," she said casually, as if she hadn't just been holding hands with another man. "How was the trip?" I stood in the doorway, silent, my eyes fixed on her. The weight of the room shifted as her smile faltered. She set the phone down and tilted her head, trying to read me. "It was fine," I said, my voice steady, "but I ran into something interesting out there." Her brow furrowed. "Oh? What do you mean?" I stepped closer, the air between us thick with tension. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about a cabin out in the woods, would you? A cozy little spot with a fireplace, a nice table, maybe some company?" The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. "What are you talking about, Jake? I don't know anything about a cabin." Liar. The word hit the air like a gunshot. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely scared. But then the mask slipped back into place, and she crossed her arms, leaning back against the couch. "I don't know what you think you saw," she said, her voice cool and dismissive, "but I was at work all day, Jake. Maybe you're just imagining things." I felt my blood boil. Imagining? Is that what you think? I wasn't imagining you sitting in that cabin, laughing with some cigar-smoking asshole while he spun a coin on the table. Don't you dare lie to me. Emily stood up now, her stance defiant. "I don't know what you're accusing me of, but you're wrong. I wasn't at any cabin, and I sure as hell wasn't with another man. Maybe you should stop spending so much time in the woods if it's messing with your head." Her words stung, but the false confidence in her tone only fueled my rage. She was lying. I could see it in the way her eyes darted away, the way she shifted her weight uncomfortably. "You want to keep lying?" I asked, stepping closer. "Go ahead, but I'll find the truth, Emily. And when I do, you're going to wish you'd just been honest." She scoffed, brushing past me. "I don't have time for this nonsense. Believe whatever you want, Jake. I'm going to bed." I watched her walk away, my fists clenched at my sides. She thought she could play me, twist the truth like she always did. But not this time. I wasn't going to let her lies cloud my judgment. I was going to get proof. That night, while Emily slept upstairs, I drove back out to the cabin. The place was dark now, the glow from the windows gone. I parked a distance away and made my way through the trees, my flashlight guiding me. I scanned the clearing, looking for anything that would give me answers. The coin, the cigar, something. I stepped up to the cabin door and tried the handle. It was locked. Undeterred, I circled around to a small window and carefully slid it open. The interior was rustic but neat, with a fireplace, a small table, and 2 chairs. My stomach churned as I pictured Emily sitting there. On the table, I found what I was looking for. A cigar but resting in an ashtray, and, next to it, the coin. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. It was an old silver dollar, worn but distinctive. I slipped it into my pocket, my jaw tightening. When I got home, I didn't sleep. Instead, I ordered a few cameras online and planned my next move. I was done asking questions. It was time to get answers. The surveillance equipment arrived 2 days later, discreetly packaged in plain brown boxes. While Emily went about her day with her usual routine of fake smiles and half-hearted small talk, I was in the garage, unboxing cameras and testing their feeds. My hands moved with a calm precision, but inside, I was a storm. Every glance she gave me felt like another lie, and every word she spoke seemed carefully measured to hide the truth. That evening, after Emily had gone to bed, I loaded the equipment into my truck and headed back to the cabin. The woods were silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every rustle of leaves sound deafening. I parked far enough away to avoid drawing attention and made my way through the trees, my steps deliberate and quiet. The cabin was as I had left it, dark and unassuming. I worked quickly, setting up cameras in strategic spots around the clearing, the door, and the windows. 2 more went inside, carefully hidden to avoid detection. When I was done, I stepped back, satisfied. Now it was just a matter of waiting. The first few days were uneventful. Emily carried on as if nothing had happened, her routine as meticulous as ever. But on the 4th day, the footage changed everything. It was late when I sat down in the garage with my laptop, reviewing the feeds. The cabin's clearing looked empty under the moonlight, but then headlights appeared, cutting through the darkness. A truck pulled up, and I leaned closer to the screen. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped the man I'd seen before, his silhouette unmistakable. He walked to the cabin, opened the door, and disappeared inside. Minutes later, Emily arrived. My blood ran cold as I watched her step out of her car, dressed far nicer than she'd ever bothered for me in months. She knocked on the cabin door, her movements casual, like this was just another part of her day. The door opened, and the man greeted her with a smile before pulling her inside. I fast-forwarded through the footage, unable to stomach what was happening. Their conversations were too faint to catch, but their body language told me everything I needed to know. They were comfortable with each other, intimate in a way that made my stomach churn. Then I noticed something, a detail that turned my disgust into a deeper, darker rage. The man, I recognized him. At first, it was the scar on his left hand that caught my attention, but as he stepped into better light, the realization hit me like a freight train. Daniel, Emily's ex-boyfriend. The one she told me had died years ago in some tragic accident. I remembered the way she cried when she told me the story, how she'd clung to me, claiming I was the only man she'd ever truly loved after him. It had been a lie. All of it. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. If Daniel wasn't dead, then what the hell had he been doing all these years? And why had Emily kept this from me? I needed answers, and I needed them now. Over the next few days, I dug deeper. A few phone calls and online searches uncovered a disturbing truth about Daniel. He'd been arrested years ago for fraud and embezzlement, but had disappeared before serving his sentence. His trail had gone cold, and authorities had assumed he'd fled the country, or worse. Now it all made sense. He hadn't fled. He'd faked his death, with Emily's help. The pieces of the puzzle started coming together. Emily's sudden distance, her odd behavior, the hidden cabin. She hadn't just been meeting an old flame. She was part of something bigger, something darker. I found myself wondering how far her lies went. Had our entire marriage been built on deceit? Late one night, I reviewed the footage again and caught a snippet of their conversation. It was faint, but with the right headphones and some tweaking, I managed to make out a few words. "Money's almost ready," Emily said, her voice low. "We just need a little more time." "You've got to be careful," Daniel replied. "If he finds out." I slammed the laptop shut, my vision red with anger. They weren't just sneaking around behind my back. They were planning something that involved money. My money. The realization hit me like a gut punch. They were planning to steal from me, to take everything I'd worked for and vanish together. My rage turned into a cold, calculating resolve. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about justice. And I was going to make damn sure they paid for every lie, every betrayal, every stolen moment of my life. The evidence was damning. I had hours of surveillance footage, audio snippets of their whispered plans, and a mounting list of lies Emily had spun over the years. But nothing prepared me for the depth of their betrayal when I discovered the extent of their scheme. Emily had been systematically draining our joint accounts for months, small amounts at first, just enough to go unnoticed. But as I combed through bank statements late one night, the larger withdrawals became glaringly obvious. She'd been funneling the money into an account I didn't recognize, one I suspected was tied to Daniel. My savings, everything I'd worked my ass off for, was disappearing right under my nose. The kicker? Emily had been covering her tracks by feigning interest in our financial future. She'd insisted on managing our accounts, claiming she was better at long-term planning. I clenched my jaw as I recalled her patronizing comments about my supposed lack of attention to detail. Every smile, every reassuring word. It had all been a front. The next day, I played the role of the oblivious husband. Over breakfast, I casually mentioned I'd be heading out for another hunting trip the following week. Emily barely looked up from her coffee, her expression perfectly neutral, but I saw the faint flicker of relief in her eyes. She thought she had me fooled, that her plan was still intact. "Anything you need while I'm out?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. "No, I'm fine," she said with a tight smile. "Just make sure you don't get lost out there again." Her little jab didn't faze me. I had bigger things to worry about. That evening, I paid a visit to Sheriff Lawson. He was an old-school type, the kind of guy who trusted his gut and didn't take kindly to bullshit. When I laid out my suspicions, he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his weathered face unreadable. "Jake, you're telling me your wife is not only cheating on you but also plotting to steal your money with a man who's supposed to be dead?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "I've got proof," I said, sliding a USB drive across his desk. "Surveillance footage, audio recordings, bank statements. Take a look for yourself." He eyed the drive, then me, before plugging it into his computer. The room was silent as he watched the footage, his expression hardening with each passing second. When he got to the audio of Emily discussing the money, he let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "You weren't kidding." "That's just the tip of the iceberg," I said, my voice steady. "They're planning to leave town soon, and I need your help to stop them." Lawson nodded, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "All right, Jake. Here's what we're gonna do. You pretend like you're going on that hunting trip, just like you told her. We'll set up a sting at the cabin and catch them in the act." The next few days were a blur of preparation. I handed over all the evidence I'd collected, and Lawson put together a small team to help with the operation. Meanwhile, I went about my daily routine, careful not to tip Emily off. She continued to play her part, acting every bit the dutiful wife, but I could see the cracks in her facade. The late-night phone calls, the secretive glances at her phone. It was all so painfully obvious now. When the day of my trip arrived, I packed my truck as usual, making a show of it for Emily's benefit. She kissed me goodbye at the door, her lips barely brushing mine, and wished me a safe trip. I nodded, climbing into the truck without a word. As I drove away, I caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, watching me go with a look that sent a chill down my spine. Instead of heading to the woods, I parked a few miles away and met Lawson and his team at a staging point near the cabin. The plan was simple. Wait until Emily and Daniel arrived, let them incriminate themselves, and move in for the takedown. I stayed out of sight, a small earpiece connecting me to the sheriff's team. Hours passed in tense silence. Then, just as the sun began to set, headlights appeared. Emily's car rolled into the clearing, followed shortly by Daniel's truck. I watched through binoculars as they embraced in front of the cabin, their smiles infuriatingly carefree. They disappeared inside, and the cameras we'd planted captured everything. Their laughter, their talk of running away together, their smug confidence that they'd gotten away with it. "Hold steady," Lawson's voice crackled in my ear. "We'll move in when they're least expecting it." I didn't respond, my focus locked on the cabin. My hands itched to act, to storm in and end this charade myself, but I forced myself to stay still. Patience. It wouldn't be long now. Inside that cabin, Emily and Daniel thought they were untouchable. They had no idea what was coming. The cabin sat in eerie stillness as the sun dipped below the horizon, the faint glow of its windows standing out against the darkening woods. Inside, Emily and Daniel laughed, their voices carrying faintly through the surveillance equipment Sheriff Lawson and his team had set up. The bastard even poured her a drink, toasting to their new beginning. The sound of their glasses clinking was a knife twisting in my gut, but I stayed put, crouched in the dense underbrush with the sheriff and his deputy. We'd been in position for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My patience was razor-thin, my fingers twitching against the handle of the hunting knife I'd brought. I'd leave Daniel to the law, but I wasn't above making sure he remembered me. "Easy, Jake," Lawson said quietly, his hand on my shoulder. "We need them to incriminate themselves. Give it time." Through the binoculars, I watched as Daniel pulled out a duffel bag, unzipped it, and revealed stacks of cash. My cash. Emily's eyes lit up as she ran her hands over the bills, her smile sickeningly sweet. It was clear she wasn't just a pawn in this. She was a full-fledged conspirator. "That should be enough to get us started," Daniel said, lighting a cigar and leaning back in his chair. "Finally," Emily replied. "I've had to put up with Jake's crap for far too long. The way he acts, like he's some kind of hero, like I owe him something. This'll teach him." I bit back a growl, the anger boiling inside me barely contained. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a calculated effort to destroy me. She'd never loved me. She'd used me. Lawson's voice cut through my thoughts. "That's enough. We've got what we need." The sheriff signaled his deputy, and the two of them moved quietly toward the cabin. I followed close behind, my boots silent on the soft forest floor. As we approached, I could see Emily and Daniel through the window, their laughter oblivious to the storm about to break. Lawson gestured for me to hang back as he and the deputy moved in. The sheriff kicked the door open with a force that sent it slamming against the wall. "Sheriff's Department. Hands where I can see them." Daniel jumped to his feet, his cigar falling from his mouth. Emily screamed, stumbling backward, her drink shattering on the floor. The room erupted into chaos as the deputy moved to restrain Daniel, who tried to bolt for the back door. He didn't get far. I stepped in as Daniel spun around, finding himself face to face with me. His eyes widened in recognition, and for a split second, I saw fear flicker across his face.
Jake.
I didn't let him finish. My fist connected with his jaw, sending him crashing to the ground. The deputy was on him in an instant, slapping cuffs on him as Daniel groaned in pain.
Jake.
Emily shrieked, her voice high-pitched and frantic. She backed into the corner of the room, her hands raised as if that would save her. I can explain. Explain? I growled, stepping toward her. You think there's an explanation for this? For lying to me, stealing from me, betraying me? You disgust me, Emily. Her tears came fast, but they weren't the kind of tears that begged for forgiveness. They were the tears of someone who'd finally been caught. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she stammered. Daniel, he made me do it. Don't you dare try to pin this on him, I snapped. You were all in, Emily. I heard you. I saw you. You've been lying to me for years. She collapsed into a heap, sobbing, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. This wasn't the woman I thought I'd married. She'd been wearing a mask the whole time, and now, finally, it had shattered. As the deputy dragged Daniel out to the waiting patrol car, Lawson stepped up beside me. She's all yours for now, he said, his voice low. We'll handle her after we book him. I turned back to Emily, who was still on the floor, her makeup smeared and her lies exposed. I'm done with you, I said coldly. You can cry, you can beg, but it doesn't change what you are. A liar, a cheat, and you'll pay for every damn thing you've done. Her sobs turned to wails as I walked out, the cabin door slamming shut behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Whatever shred of humanity I'd once felt for her was gone, burned away by the fire of her betrayal. The night was still as I stepped into the clearing, the weight of the past few weeks finally beginning to lift. Justice wasn't done yet, but the trap had sprung, and there was no escaping it now. Emily and Daniel's lives were in ruins, and I was just getting started. The night air was crisp as I leaned against my truck, watching the sheriff's cruiser disappear down the dirt road with Daniel handcuffed in the back. His smirk had faded the moment I broke his jaw, and by the time the deputy shoved him into the car, he looked like a man who'd realized his luck had run out. But I wasn't done. Emily was still in the cabin, her cries echoing faintly through the trees. Part of me wanted to leave her there, wallowing in the mess she'd made, but I wasn't about to let her slither her way out of this with more lies and excuses. No, she was going to face me, and she was going to hear exactly what I thought of her. I pushed the door open without knocking. She was still on the floor where I'd left her, mascara streaked down her face, her body shaking with sobs. The duffel bag of money lay open on the table, a silent reminder of everything she tried to steal from me. When she heard the door, she looked up, her eyes red and swollen. Jake, please. Save it, I snapped, slamming the door behind me. I don't want to hear your excuses. She flinched, her hands trembling as she tried to wipe her face. I didn't mean for this to happen, she stammered. It just got out of control. Daniel, don't, I growled, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to blame him. I heard everything, Emily. Every disgusting, manipulative word out of your mouth. You used me. You lied to me. And for what? Money? Him? She shook her head frantically, her words spilling out in a rush. I was scared, Jake. I didn't know how to get out of it. He threatened me. Bullshit. I shouted, my voice echoing through the cabin. You were right there with him, laughing about how you'd take my money and run. You're not a victim, Emily. You're a goddamn snake. Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing but cold, unrelenting anger. You had a choice, I said, my voice low and dangerous. You could have come to me, told me the truth, but you didn't, because you didn't care. You never cared. She tried to crawl closer, her hands outstretched like she thought I might actually comfort her. Jake, I love you. I swear. I barked a harsh laugh, stepping back. Love? You don't know the first thing about love. You don't love me. You love control. You love taking what isn't yours and thinking you'll never get caught. For a moment, she just stared at me, her lips trembling. Then, as if something inside her snapped, her expression hardened. The tears stopped, and she pushed herself to her feet, her posture defiant. "Fine," she spat. "You want the truth? I did it. I lied to you. I cheated. And you know what? I don't regret it. You're a miserable bastard, Jake. Always brooding, always thinking you're better than everyone else. Daniel was right. You're pathetic." Her words hit like a slap, but they didn't break me. If anything, they only confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't the woman I'd married. Maybe she never had been. I stepped closer, looming over her. "You think that makes you powerful?" I said quietly. "That lying and stealing somehow makes you better than me? You're nothing, Emily. And now, everyone's going to see you for what you really are." She opened her mouth to retort, but the sound of tires crunching on gravel cut her off. A second sheriff's cruiser pulled up outside, the lights flashing faintly through the windows. Lawson stepped in a moment later, his expression grim. "Emily," he said, his voice flat, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and aiding a fugitive." Her bravado crumbled in an instant. "No, wait," she cried, backing away as Lawson approached. "You can't do this. Jake, please tell him." I crossed my arms, watching as the sheriff cuffed her hands behind her back. "You brought this on yourself," I said coldly. "Don't ever ask me for anything again." As Lawson led her out to the cruiser, she screamed and begged, her voice growing fainter until the car doors slammed shut. I stood in the doorway of the cabin, staring at the wreckage of the life I thought I'd had. The duffel bag, the empty whiskey glasses, the broken trust. This wasn't closure. Not yet, but it was a start. By the time I climbed back into my truck and followed the cruisers down the road, I felt something I hadn't in weeks, a sliver of peace. Emily and Daniel were done. Their lies were exposed, their plans destroyed. And for the first time, I was free to rebuild, without their poison in my life. The weeks following the showdown at the cabin were a whirlwind of paperwork, legal battles, and painful realizations. Emily's betrayal had cut deep, but the process of unraveling her schemes and ensuring she faced justice was as satisfying as it was necessary. The sheriff's department didn't waste time. With Daniel in custody, it didn't take long for him to crack under pressure, spilling every detail of their plan. Emily's name came up repeatedly, her fingerprints all over the accounts, the stolen money, and even the paperwork from years ago when Daniel faked his death. The case against her was airtight. The divorce proceedings were equally brutal, but this time, I was the one holding the cards. The evidence of her infidelity, her criminal conspiracy, and the financial fraud left her with no leverage. My lawyer made sure she got nothing. Not a cent of my money, not a piece of the house, not even the car she drove. Everything she thought she was going to take from me was stripped away. Emily tried to fight back, of course. She cried in court, claimed she was coerced, that she was just a victim in Daniel's schemes. But the recordings, the footage, and the bank statements told a different story. The judge saw right through her, and when the verdict came down, it was clear she wouldn't be walking away from this unscathed. A month after her arrest, I stood in front of the house, watching as a moving truck hauled away the last of my belongings. The place felt like a tomb now, every room haunted by memories of a life that had been nothing more than a lie. I decided to sell it, using the proceeds to start fresh somewhere far from the small town where everyone knew my story. Tom, my neighbor and one of the few people I trusted through all of this, came over as the movers loaded the final box into my truck. "You sure about this, Jake?" he asked, his tone heavy with concern. "Yeah," I said, glancing at the house one last time. "There's nothing left for me here." Tom nodded, clapping me on the shoulder. "You'll be all right. You're tougher than most people I know." I gave him a small, tired smile. "Thanks, Tom. Take care of yourself." With that, I climbed into my truck and pulled out of the driveway, leaving the house and everything it represented in the rearview mirror. The city I chose was a few hundred miles away, a fresh start in every sense of the word. I found a small apartment on the outskirts of town, modest but comfortable. The first night I spent there was the best sleep I'd had in months. The weight of Emily and Daniel's betrayal finally lifted from my shoulders. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, I began to rebuild. I threw myself into work, taking on projects that kept me busy and gave me a sense of purpose. On weekends, I explored the surrounding area, hiking trails that reminded me of the woods where everything had started. But this time, the solitude felt different, peaceful, not lonely. One evening, as I sat on the balcony with a beer in hand, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. Emily's lies, Daniel's schemes, the confrontation at the cabin. It all felt like a bad dream, something that had happened to someone else. But the scars were real, and so were the lessons. I'd trusted too easily, let love blind me to the red flags that had been there all along. But I'd also learned that I was stronger than I'd ever realized. I'd faced betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak, and I'd come out the other side, battered but unbroken. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt like it was mine to shape. No more lies, no more manipulations. Just me, my choices, and the life I wanted to build. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, I raised my beer in a silent toast. To freedom, to resilience, to never letting anyone take advantage of me again. And with that, I closed the door on the past and stepped into a future that was finally, truly mine. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel.